second player press start.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Second Player Press Start. My name is James and I'm joined by my friend
Darren.
And today we are going to talk about a game that no one's really heard of. It's an indie title.
Small developer.
Pretty small user base, and that is Fortnite Battle Royale. Of course, I'm kidding. This is one of the largest games in the world right now. It's available for PC, Mac, PlayStation, Xbox, iOS, Nintendo Switch, and Android, I believe, is coming. It's pretty much anything.
Yeah.
Anything it's available for. And you can play against any of those platforms unless you're on the PlayStation, which is what we did tonight. We kind of set up almost like an old school LAN party.
Yeah.
I had my Switch hooked up to a secondary screen that I have, and Darren was playing on the Xbox One.
Right.
And we were able to join a party together and play, which I think that's the first time I've ever done like a cross-console multiplayer thing.
Yeah, like the last time I did anything even similar was some of the original Xbox, when you could plug in multiple TVs and link it up via LAN cables. I mean, I did LAN parties on PC, but you wouldn't call that cross-platform.
No. But yeah, it was kind of cool playing
for sure.
kind of the same game on two different screens. A lot of the times when we get together, it is kind of a split screen or co-op or kind of pass the controller experience. So it was neat to actually have the ability to do that. And I hope we are going to a future where, you know, the platform doesn't really matter.
Right. Is that platform agnostic? Is that what it's called?
Yeah, I guess that would be the term.
Yeah, where the game is what people are involved in. It doesn't matter how you're playing it or where you're playing it.
Yeah, and the fact that you could have this one account, and if you're like, I think a lot of people now, you have multiple devices, and if you have a few minutes, you could whip out your phone and play and level up or whatever, and then when you get home, you turn on your Xbox and you kind of pick up your progression there.
Right.
I think that's where gaming kind of needs to go. As these devices are getting more powerful, it kind of lowers that level of entry, right?
Sure. And we've seen some of that in other games where there's, I remember you showing me, I forget the name right now, The Division, and how you could, was it The Division or something else where you could jump in on a mobile platform to do little things here and there. It wasn't the full game, but you could augment your play from a mobile platform and help out your team or collect things or whatever.
I think the marketing buzzword they used was second screen experience.
There you go.
Which was, kind of like a companion app or something where you could kind of, drop supply drops for your friend.
Sure.
I don't think that ever really took off the way they were kind of hyping it up to be.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because it depends what you're getting out of the game and if the second companion aspect to it is enjoyable, right? If there's enough value there's always going to be somebody that's going to grind for it, in the same way that you might not get any fun out of grinding an RPG, but some people will play an area of the game over and over and over to level up and gain experience and that kind of thing. If it's just a grind, you're not going to have as many people doing it. But if there's a mini game involved and that mini game is as good as some of the games you're playing on your Android or your Apple, your iPhone anyway, then I can see there being a market for that. And the fact that you're connecting it to something that has persistence, that you're connecting it to something that you play with your friends, it means that there's more longevity there, which is a big thing today, especially when we hear talk of some of the new consoles. They're not releasing new consoles so much as they're modularizing them. So
Right.
you can upgrade your console just like you could a PC.
Yeah. And I've been playing a lot of Fortnite lately since it came to the Switch. I did try it a while back, and I think we even played it. I think I showed you.
Yeah, you showed it to me. It was a few months ago, for sure.
Yeah.
It could have even been before Christmas. It could have been that far. Like, it was in beta then. It still says beta now, though. That kind of surprised me. I didn't think that there would still be the beta tag on it. But when you showed it to me, it was an open beta, I think.
I believe so, yeah.
And you played through a few solo things. There wasn't some of the same features that we see now. I don't even know if building was a thing then when we first
It
saw
might have been, but I don't think anyone really exploited it to the way that we've seen some of the
Right.
players that play this kind of do.
Right.
So yeah, I played it like you said a few months ago. I never really got into it. PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds was kind of more my jam when that came to the Xbox, so I kind of left Fortnite behind. And I played a decent amount of PUBG, I guess is what the kids call it. And that is very much the same concept of, if you don't know, that 100 players will kind of drop into an island, and there's this kind of ever-shrinking circle that you have to stay in.
Right.
And Fortnite essentially copied that formula.
Sure.
But they have this building mechanic that's kind of adds a little bit of a spin to it, which I didn't appreciate at first, but now that I've been playing it pretty frequently on my Switch, I guess I'm a Fortnite guy over a PUBG guy, just because, I haven't touched that thing in a while. And when I think it was a few weeks ago, I did go back to PUBG, and just the level of polish and how easy it is to jump into a game, and the graphics and the frame rate is so much smoother in Fortnite than PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds on the Xbox. Like, it's a pretty terrible experience. But Fortnite is such a polished game, even though it says it's still in beta.
Right.
So yeah, I've been playing primarily solo, which is you're just all by yourself against 100 other players. I've uploaded a little YouTube montage of some of my finer moments in Fortnite.
Nice. Props.
And I feel myself kind of getting better at it, which is kind of nice when you put time into a game and you feel like you're getting better, to the point where I have actually, I think, 2 victories under my belt.
Right.
Which I never got as close in PUBG as I have in Fortnite. So I don't know what that says about the 2 games. Maybe one's a bit more hardcore and Fortnite's maybe perhaps a bit more casual, but I've been really enjoying it, and I wanted to try this kind of cross-platform multiplayer, as just kind of getting your feedback on the game.
Sure.
We started off in the playground mode, which is just kind of you can hop into a map and just kind of run around and get a feel for
just sandbox mode. You don't have any pressure, and you can test the mechanisms and see how things work and figure your buttons out, and I can invert my control scheme. And
so weird that he does that. Darren likes to invert his aim, which I've always found weird. But
just the y-axis.
Just the y-axis. So what did you think, kind of just as your first kind of dive into that playground of kind of, I kind of taught you some of the ropes of the basics. I mean,
so I've seen you play Fortnite before. So, if we're being totally honest with some of the games that we've talked about previously on the show, I had more experience with this game in terms of I knew what it was, I knew what to expect. That doesn't mean that my first impression, especially of the cross-platform, that was still a first impression. The fact that I hadn't ever played it before, still my first experience with the game. And still, duos was never an option before, so I could never play with James. If I was to play before, the only way that we would be in the same game together is if we queued together and ended up fighting each other. And who knows, I might just see, all drug always killed James Almeida in like the little footnotes at some point when I played.
Right.
But in this version of it, it seemed a little more, I guess you could say, tactical compared to what my experience with the game would otherwise feel like, because we were relying on each other's vision, we were relying on each other's decision making and like guarding points and passing things back to each other and back and forth. There was a point where we got killed really early in a map because we were trying to figure out how to drop stuff or give stuff to each other. James was looking through his inventory. I wasn't paying attention because it was one of my first times. And some dude sneaks up, shoots James in the back, and then I'm like, oh, what's going on? I'm firing shots, and then I died too. So there's that element where, we got a laugh out of it, but considering how long it took us to get into the game and then get into a new game, it wasn't that much of a loss.
No.
Whereas like what I hear you saying is in maybe PUBG or maybe further back in its development, it took a long time to load. It took a long time to get in. And if you were to die early, the fact that you spent more time loading or looking for a match than you did playing the game would be just a real... it would just suck. Like, it would be boring. I mean, I can see why when a game like this hits critical mass, the advantage of having something that's snappy, that's speedy, and that you can jump into games all the time, like 24 hours a day, is a huge boon for its community. The other part of it too is that even just the simple mechanism of showing the camera feed from the person who just killed you means that you've got some vested interest or maybe some, revenge hope for the person that just killed you. Like, you either want to see how far they can push or you want to see them get shot, right?
Yeah.
So just shifting that experience once you do get shot means that you're still invested in that match that was being played that you just lost in. You can see your stats and all that and how far you went. I think in the last game, I had 0 stats anywhere except that I walked 1 kilometer and then took 163 points of damage, which includes my health and my armor. So I'm not super good at Fortnite, but I think some of those extra features like that invest me in a game that can otherwise be a 5-minute experience.
For sure.
I thought that was interesting. I should say too that I was really impressed with the cross-platform, simply because we've played Xbox games before or PlayStation games before when we're sitting on the couch in the same room using the same console, and it takes us longer to figure out how to get in one party to play one game together.
That's very true, yeah.
And now, for whatever reason, we were sitting down, James invites his other profile from a totally different console, totally different system, totally different developer or hardware provider.
Yeah.
Right? And we sit down, and the next thing we know, we're both of our characters are on the screen, and we hit the ready button, and it's loading, which was mind-blowing in comparison to some of those other really poor experiences we've had in couch multiplayer before.
Yeah, there's been, like, on the Xbox, it's like, I think there was one time where we're trying to, it forced us to sign in with another account, and then we're like, okay, well, why don't we use your old Hotmail account? And then you had to find a password, and it was just this whole ordeal.
Yeah.
That took way too long just to play a game.
Yeah, exactly.
Whereas, you're taking two completely different systems, and it was that simple to just connect and play, which is part of why I wanted to do this, was just to see what that experience was like.
Definitely.
And they've made it very easy to do that.
Yeah, I think from the onset, from the first screen through to getting into the game, it gives the expectation that it's very casual, right? That the cartoony figures, the cartoony world, the really bright colors across the spectrum of colors, it's not in one particular tone like you might see, say, in a Resident Evil game, or that you might see even like Mario has these types of colors, right?
Right.
And Nintendo has these types of colors. It's just across the spectrum of different shades of all these different colors, and it's not dark. It doesn't have a particular like haze over it, or a fog like you might see in certain genres, or the realistic look like you might see in RPGs or in other first-person type games. It just feels really friendly, and that's the best way to say it. The fact that all the title screens, if they show more than one character at all, they're different races, different genders. We don't get a feeling in this that anybody is excluded from playing this game, that there's any kind of like you mentioned with PUBG, I don't have any experience with it, but the idea that maybe it's more for hardcore players, maybe there's aspects about the way it presents itself that makes it feel that way. And I didn't feel that way about this game at all. I felt like, even though and I'll get into this in a second, but even though I might have felt overwhelmed by all the options presented to me in terms of the user interface, it felt like the game was welcoming me, and that it was supposed to be fun and enjoyable. And if I had a poor experience with it, that's not what the game intended.
Yeah.
And it was that there's ways to maybe get around that, or there's ways that they've designed around that. So that's kind of the feeling that I had. I feel like that's a really important aspect, and I would argue that's probably a testament to the growth that they've seen. My challenge was in the UI, in just there being so many different things, and I know it's still in beta, so I know there's still things that could change. I also know that duos wasn't a thing until recently, or semi-recently, maybe. Weeks, months.
Again, I've only been playing since they released the Switch version maybe like a month ago.
Okay.
And I know I think tomorrow's like the 5th season.
Right.
So I haven't really followed the game up until I started playing.
Sure.
But I believe that Duos is a fairly new addition.
The reason I mention is because, so when we log into a lobby together, it looks like there's a spot for half a dozen characters. Now, my assumption then would be that you could still group in even a normal game, but you don't group as 6. You just group to play on one map.
I believe it's up to 4 people, because there is another option for either groups or squads, I think.
Okay.
I think that's a group of 4, so potentially you could get 4 friends together.
Right.
And including yourself, and then play.
The reason I mentioned specifically and not knowing how long it is because there's elements of the duos, even when we went initially into the playground mode or that sandbox mode, where we couldn't even see each other on the map. And there's little things like that where I know that if we're talking about the polish in some aspects of the game, in other aspects it's just missing. For example, it's really hard, and it seems pretty unintuitive to work with the map with the control system. Some of them are triggers, some of them, like, you'd think they would be your zoom buttons, but instead they're like dropping control points and stuff like that. And it's just like, if I'm playing with somebody who I want to, especially if I'm not on voice communication or not in the same room, because the likelihood of us playing cross-platform in the same room, it's not going to happen that often. The fact that James has different platforms and he wants to try that, we have that opportunity. But I don't think everybody who's going to be playing with a friend is going to be playing it in that fashion.
No.
So to be able to drop points on the map to say, hey, let's head in this direction in a quick way. I know there was even some sort of emoji system where you could talk and you could give, like, not really order system,
just kind of like emotes, right?
Yeah. And that was something I found by accident. And then once we started playing the game, because we were in the same room, I just overlooked it entirely. But there was a lot of times where I was using the compass signals to say, hey, James, this is where I think these people are. This is where I think we should go. Because there wasn't really an easy way to combine our tactical knowledge of what's happening in a way that, without just talking with each other and say, hey, look at my screen, because I'm seeing something and I don't know how to convey that to you through the game. So I think that's an area that could definitely be improved. I felt as soon as we were dropped in together that the game felt more tactical because we were talking through a strategy. Whereas if it was a solo game, because there would be none of that, it would simply be, what do I see in front of me? What can I make use of? Do I have enough room to pick stuff up? And I didn't even feel personally that the building element was that, I don't want to say engaging, because I didn't use it a lot because I didn't see the value in it. But even in seeing other people and how instead of using a shield, they just build walls around themselves when they start getting shot at. To me, that fits in the casual expectation of the game, though it doesn't suit me as like a style that I'm looking for when I play a first-person shooter kind of thing, or third-person shooter or whatever. I can't exactly say that it's a bad thing. It just breaks that expectation in that style of game.
Yeah, I mean, as I've barely touched the building aspect, as I've just kind of been casually playing the solo stuff.
Right.
But as I'm kind of, once you get killed, you can kind of observe the person that killed you, seeing the way that they're kind of strategically, like you said, placing up walls when they're getting shot.
Right.
I'm then wanting to kind of try those things myself.
Sure.
Even building little ramps to get to areas that you can see has, a loot crate.
Yeah. Yeah.
Little things like that makes me kind of want to experiment more with the building, but I guess that's just because I have kind of invested my time into playing that game.
Right.
I think as a casual player, maybe you just go in and just want to shoot some dudes, which we didn't actually do.
We didn't shoot a lot of people.
No, which...
we almost won once, but we didn't shoot a lot of people.
Yeah, it was kind of a rare experience, because usually you drop in and there's at least someone kind of on your tail, but
right.
I guess for whatever reason, the 2 times that we played, we dropped in zones where nobody else dropped, which, I mean, it was still kind of fun, kind of, waiting to be kind of ambushed or looking around.
Sure.
And I mean, I can speak for myself. You kind of feel that tension building as you see the number drop of how many people are left.
Right.
And as this circle is kind of getting smaller and smaller.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good segue into that base mechanism, that core mechanism of the game, of like a battle royale, right? Like King of the Hill.
Yeah.
Essentially, not only does the mechanism of this impending storm, whatever, it's just a wall, right? But the fact that it's moving in a circle and the circle is getting smaller and smaller and smaller forces you to interact with other players in the map, because you can't get in a small area with 100 players and not see somebody else. It's just not possible. In addition to that, it also provides that tension line that is consistently growing, right? Along with these random events where all of a sudden you're in a firefight, or all of a sudden you find like a great loot chest, or you hear some explosion in the distance or something like that. And I think that consistent structure of smaller circle and upping the tension to as you get to the last man standing, or woman standing, or person standing, along with the fact that along the way there's these random aspects, these random timed type things that are like, you know, winning in the lottery in a way, right? You either get something good or there's this huge moment of anxiety as you're like, am I going to win this gunfight and that kind of thing. I think all those lead to just a really, really well-crafted experience from start to finish, right?
Yeah.
The fact that you're coming in and you're free falling off this school bus is like, you know, it adds this casual element to it that maybe, I don't know how PUBG does that first dive, but even those aspects in this game, they still feel casual, but that tension is still there. And that tension is what drives you, especially when you come in. We came in like, what, third or fourth somewhere in one of the matches we played. But when you come in and you realize that, you know, I was this close and it's going to take me all of 1 minute probably to get back into the game, then why wouldn't I play another match?
For sure.
And I think there's a lot of value in that.
Yeah. Yeah, and I like that the games, you know, of course it relies on skill, but there is this element of luck too, right? Like, there's this random chance that where you decide to drop, there may just be all the things that you need to win the match.
Right.
And that's what I really like about this game, is just that random nature of picking a spot to drop and then just a random chance of, you know, who else has decided to drop in this exact same area.
Sure.
Or around it, or what's actually going to be here. Even in some of the houses, like in the attic, there's like loot crates. I know we didn't explore that when we were playing, but through my solo travels, even just discovering little things like that. Yeah, it's just a game where you're kind of constantly on your feet, and sometimes luck goes your way and sometimes it doesn't.
Sure. I think there's another element that comes out of that smaller circle and fighting to the last man standing, is that no matter what gear you may or may not find through the match, as you get closer to the center and more people are killed, more loot is dropped, and you're eventually going to get where you're facing off versus, you know, maybe half a dozen other people, where the amount of gear in that space is just better because you've picked up gear from the people you've killed that had better gear than maybe you did, and so on. So even this emergent aspect of it says that I'm going to continue changing my weapon, I'm going to continue upgrading, and as this tension increases, I'm going to also be finding better weapons, and I'm going to be finding better vantage points, and I'm going to maybe get the drop on somebody, and it ratchets it up in such a way that there's always something new and there's always an interesting story to tell in that sequence, right? Like I remember even in the last play sequence that we had there, we hadn't seen anybody for almost the entire match, and we think we're in a really good spot. We've got this, like, we're in this grassy knoll, right? We're on this hill. We've got a great vantage point. We can see people building. Then we're getting ready to go in and you know, try to flank them or whatever. And then we get sniped from behind, right? And it's just like those moments are, on the one hand, you're like, oh shoot, like we lost. But on the other hand, there's still a narrative part of that you remember and that you think about. And then you're like, oh, let's see how this sniper does now that we're watching him on the cam, and we see how far that person gets. So there's just a lot of investment and engagement in the way that the game is designed, and everything from the macro game with the smaller circles to the micro game of the individual tactical encounters that I think are really interesting. And I'm not surprised the game's grown the way it has.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not sure personally, because there's not a lot of long-term, when we talked about State of Decay and you had said, for example, that it was more a Darren game, the idea of like building and strategy and crafting and stuff like that. There's crafting in this game, but it's only persistent for that one match, or so I understood it.
Right. Yeah.
And the fact that persistence, my persistence comes in the case of improving my skill as a player, right? Not as a character, but as a player. And I could see investing myself in the game on that side of it, trying to get better, trying to improve my building, or trying to improve my the way that I move in the map, the way that I position myself, the way that I watch my flanks and stuff like that. But I think that because there's not a lot of persistence in the game as a character, I would find less interest in it in a long-term play. It would be something that I would pick up from time to time, and that doesn't mean that I maybe wouldn't play it for a few hours straight in one sitting and still get a lot of value out of it, but it might not be something that I would go back to over and over and over consistently. It's possible.
So there is, which one aspect I guess we didn't really look at too closely. There is actually, your character does, in a sense, level up. I think you reached like level 3, I think.
Okay.
And essentially what that does then is unlock rewards, which are kind of like cosmetic things.
Right.
And they have kind of 2 tiers. You know, there's the free tier, which is what I've been playing with, and that gets you pretty bare minimum stuff. Like I think I unlocked like a new dance move.
Sure.
And like a new glider, which is just a cosmetic thing. And they've said like all of the leveling stuff is just purely cosmetic.
Right.
But then right under that free tier, they show the battle pass, which is I think it's like 15-ish bucks per season.
Okay.
And that is then a leveling progression system that kind of follows the same path. But you get obviously better items. So the more games you play, the more kind of XP you get.
Right.
Which unlocks kind of different tiers of rewards, I guess.
Sure.
And obviously the battle pass is where they're making their money because it is a free-to-play game. You're getting, you know, the cool costumes or the cool little extra things, which for as much as I've invested in this game to date, with the new season coming out, I think tomorrow, I may even just try purchasing a battle pass just to kind of see how that experience has gone, because I've sunk enough time in this game that, you know, $15 is kind of I would have paid more than that to have this experience so far.
Right.
And it's kind of a bummer that, you know, playing under the free tier, it's like all this cool stuff I could have unlocked if I had bought that battle pass.
Right.
And they do a lot of things to kind of encourage you to play different modes. There's like little reward systems. So it's like, you know, get 2 kills with a pistol, or play 5 solo matches, or play 5 duo matches. And you get like more XP if you kind of complete those objectives versus just kind of going in and doing your standard.
Sure.
So there is kind of some satisfaction of watching the numbers go up.
Right.
But then kind of the added bonus of kind of getting these cosmetic things, which do look cool.
Yeah.
Is kind of a bonus.
Yeah, so the idea of a metagame then, right? Like a game on top of the game, or an extra gamification layer.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, and I'm thinking primarily when I talk about the long term, I'm thinking so just naming some of the games we've played, but State of Decay 2 and God of War and Detroit. There's all these games where they've got a narrative built into it, and it's not necessarily the story of my last session, but it's the story that the game is building itself, right? Whether it's written dialogue or written story elements or quests or things like that. And we talked a little bit about this when we played Captain Spirit, but how if you're not sold on some of those characters early enough, then your only incentive to keep playing is either because you paid the money for it, or because there's something about the game of it that is interesting and engaging enough to bring you back, right? Because if you're not interested in the character, then God of War might not have as much for you if from the very get-go you are engaged in Kratos, right? Or the Detroit android or whatever it happens to be. In this, it's more about you as the player, right? Because your customization choices are up to you. The way you make your player look and your skill potential for getting further in the game, unlocking more loot, finding more chests, and so on and so forth are all based on your skill potential. And that's very similar to any massively multiplayer game out there, right? Whether it has an RPG attached to it or not, right? So I think there's those aspects of the game on top of a game, but there's also the fact that because your match, even at its longest, is going to be maybe 15 minutes? Have you played longer than that?
I'd say like 20 to 30 minutes might be the max. Because
we played, I think, 3 plus the playground. The first one we lasted pretty long. The second one we died right away, and then the third one we lasted pretty long. But we played a few in the time that we played, and I didn't feel like, we were playing for 30. I don't think it felt that way.
Yeah.
But I wasn't timing.
Maybe it's a little different in solo versus duos.
Sure.
Because I guess with duos, really you're only fighting like 50.
It's kind of half the people, right?
Half the people, yeah.
When you show up face to face against another duo, like somebody's going to win and somebody's going to lose, and therefore at least 2 people have died.
Yeah.
Right? So, whereas in the solo, that's not the case. If you show up, 4 people in one spot, it might take a little bit longer than, gutting out with 2 teams.
For sure.
So, but yeah, I guess what I'm getting at is that because the play experience, the time that you're investing is variable from match to match, and even on your long end of things, your matches aren't going to be more than 20-30 minutes, like you're saying. It's something that you feel like you can pick up and play anytime, and that adds to that casual experience.
Yeah.
The time you're investing is paid off in whether it's your battle pass versus your cosmetic upgrades that you get from your normal leveling system. And so your time feels like it's recuperated in new things and cool things and customizations. But at the same time, because it is customizations that are cosmetic, you don't feel like, unless you're getting better skill, you don't feel like the game experience is changing from day to day to day, from session to session to session, like you might see in some of these other games we've played through.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, yeah, part of the reason why I'm liking the game is because I feel like I am getting better.
For sure.
I think to start, it would be pretty common that I'd be maybe like top 50. Now, like solo, I'm at least like top 20 to top 10.
Right.
So yeah, I guess there's a rewarding aspect of, feeling like you're getting better.
And as soon as you can see your player skill increase, it's like any sport or any activity where you have a metric to it, right?
Yeah.
And you can see personal improvement, and there's a huge motivation in that alone. And I think that the fact that that's built into it, plus all these cosmetic or customization type options in addition to that, lends to multiple different player types finding value in the game. So I'm not surprised that all those layers and quests and whatnot are built into it, for that reason, for progression in any capacity.
For sure. Yeah, what else is really left to say about the game? Going back a little bit, point you brought up earlier just about when we dived into the playground mode and we were just trying to figure some stuff out. Even some stuff that I didn't really know how to do because like the concept of dropping an item for your partner,
right? Obviously
I never did because if I was just playing solo, there would be no reason for me to drop
right
something for someone else. are tutorials in video games dead for these type of games? Because we played like our Call of Duty experience. We were kind of dropped in without any explanation on that zombies mode.
That's right. Yeah.
Like Nidhogg, which we just played, that didn't really have a tutorial.
No. God of War, I mean, it had a few little pop-ups here and there, similar to State of Decay had a little bit more writing because their systems were just more complex and in-depth. You could argue that whole first section of State of Decay 2 was in fact a tutorial. I'm not sure how far it gets, but if it continued, then I don't know if I could say it was a tutorial because it was just more of you learning about the world as you experience more of the world. So
yeah, it's just layers of more stuff, right?
Sure.
Yeah, it's just kind of an interesting thought that a lot of these huge games, like maybe we're just old and out of touch, but like it's amazing that they can grow to be this large without, you know, having an actual like tutorial.
Right.
Like even the fact of like dropping on an island and, you know, the circle getting smaller, none of that was really explained. Like if we knew nothing about this game, which I guess would be pretty hard to do if you're into video games at all.
Well, to be fair, when you first showed me Fortnite back in open beta, I had heard of PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds, but I didn't know the King of the Hill mechanism. That was, you know, was completely new to me.
Yeah.
And I think in this, even in the fact that, how can I say it? Things are presented to you very, what's the word I'm looking for? Intuitively, right? Where you have a time limit until you have to get out of the bus. And then there's one button that you can press to leave the bus, right? You have a countdown timer that says that the circle's going to move in. And if you're right on the edge of it and it's coming towards you, you can see this thing in the world map, not only on your mini map. And it's pretty clear that, you know, being on the outside of it isn't good. In fact, when we got out on the outside of it in one point, it was pretty clear that we shouldn't stay there, right? And I think that there's aspects like this that are very much intuitive in the design and in the way that the game presents itself to you that doesn't require a tutorialization. It doesn't require reading a manual if you can present it in a way that to the user, whether new or has some experience with these games or no experience with these types of games, there's some things that you will pick up. And when you add that to the fact that this game, like we said earlier, it requires all of, if you were doing the solo, all of 3 button presses from the time you launch the game to the time you're in the game, plus like a little bit of loading. That's not a lot of time to invest if you get killed early in the first game.
Right.
Right. And even then, if you get killed early in the first game because you drop where everybody else is, the next game you'll drop somewhere else. And then maybe then you'll learn about how the circle moves. So the fact that the games are short, the fact that they're always consistent in their structure, means that anytime you learn one thing, that's something that you can carry forward with you into your second game, right? And I would argue too that there's some people that after multiple playthroughs, they're still not really building a lot, like you were saying for yourself.
Yeah.
You could decide to go into a playground mode and mess around with building, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to change your playstyle in the game. You might throw up another thing or try to get to a loot chest or something that you might not have otherwise, but by and large, your play experience is going to be so similar from time to time that everything you learn, little piece of info or not, is just going to carry forward and improve the player skill, right? It's going to improve your understanding of the game. And like we talked about in Nidhogg and other games, just the nuance and the detail that we learn from each session carries forward. And that's where that persistence comes in. With me, not with an avatar.
Right. That makes perfect sense. Yeah.
Versus, like we said, there's some things that couldn't be conveyed in State of Decay in a way that we understood, right? There was stuff in God of War that was conveyed really well, but then when we jumped into the menu, if you remember, it's like, whoa, like where did all this stuff come from? Because that wasn't conveyed in this intuitive step-by-step incremental fashion. Instead, we were just presented with everything at once. And that's why when I talked about the user interface in particular for this game, if I didn't know some of my ways around a controller for the purpose of a shooter game, like this is aim down sights, this is fire, and this is move, and that kind of thing, and if you weren't telling me how to do some of the interactions with the weapons or change weapons and stuff, either I would have had to look for the iconography on the screen because there's like left bumper, right bumper type thing, or I would just figure it out by playing, or I look at my controller menu, right? It would be one of those few things. Yeah, I'm not sure what else to say about that. I did think that this user interface was pretty over the top because there was a lot of menu information that was just on the HUD, right? We had our timers, we had our countdown of timer plus the player count. We had the people in our group, which when we played once, we did a 50 versus 50, right?
Yeah.
So there's a whole bunch of titles down the side. We have our mini map, we have all of our menu items that we're carrying, plus we have all the building menu things that we could build if we move to that section. There's just a lot of stuff presented as icons. And in my first play, unless you would have explained things, I wouldn't have even bothered. I just, okay, gun, shoot, let's see what happens. That's probably how I would have gotten through it.
Right.
Just because, like I said earlier, the expectation from the game is it's casual. I can drop in and play. I can play 5 minutes and get killed, or I can play 10 minutes and, get in the top 20, right?
Yeah, I guess maybe that's why this game is so successful, because, on the surface, maybe it looks like a fun, cartoony shooter, but as we kind of, from what I've played and from what you've witnessed, there's this whole kind of other layer to it.
Sure.
So I guess, yeah, it kind of tickles like both sides of like, if you just want something to kind of dip in and play and potentially just shoot some dudes, then there's that.
Right.
But if you, want to invest the time and kind of figure out all these little nuances, again, kind of going back to like Nidhogg, that's there for you too. And there's a lot to kind of learn.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you think this would be something you would install on your PC to play?
This is the kind of game where I feel like I would have more fun if there was friends.
Yeah.
One way or the other, whether I'm shooting them in the face or whether I'm on the same team. And that's the same for me with a lot of multiplayer. I would say multiplayer, like player versus player games. Because there's multiplayer co-op, right?
Yeah.
But and that would require a friend as well. But I'm thinking of like MOBAs and first-person shooters and deathmatch and all that kind of stuff. They have their appeal to me, but their lasting power remains in how much social contact I get out of it.
Right.
If there's nobody to group up with, then I'm less likely to pick it up than a game that I can group up with somebody.
Yeah.
And more so with people that I have can have some type of verbal communication with. That's a big part of these games for me, is that social aspect and learning about the game together. And I think part of it is because it's been said, whether from a psychological perspective or design perspective, but there's like 4 player archetypes. Some people say there's more than that and less, but you have like explorer type players, right? You have social players, you have griefers, you have the competitive people and things like that. And I feel like a game like this offers something for everybody, right?
For sure.
Like if you just want to drop to a place in the map you've never been before and fool around for 10 minutes while the circle gets closer and you just stay at the edges, you can totally do that. And then hope for the best when you get to the end. Can you outlast other people simply by not getting into firefights like we happen to do twice in a row, right? Or you can run for the center and just run wherever you think people are to try to be as aggressive and competitive as possible. Or some mix of both. Or maybe you can build build an awesome tower, like get to the center and build this awesome tower or whatever, right?
Yeah.
So I think there's something for everybody in that space. I am glad that it doesn't appear at first hand that the style or the genre or even the mechanisms of the game lend themselves to griefer play, because I can't consistently follow one person down and make the game hell for them. Right? Like you might in an MMORPG where you just wait for that person to leave town, where they go into a PvP zone and then just kill them and take their stuff.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem like that happens in this game, just based on the design of it. So I appreciate that too, because when you have a game that's this big, there's always potential for those people to come out and make the game crappy for people.
Sure.
So I'm glad that doesn't seem to be an aspect of this design.
Cool. Did you have any other thoughts before we wrap this up, or?
Not really, no. I'm glad that they're introducing some of these other social parts of it. I'd be less likely, like I said, unless we were always guaranteed to queue together and fight against each other, I'd be less inclined to play this game than I am now, simply because there's a duo mode.
Right.
Or a team mode or a squad or whatever. I think the squad even lends itself to more of a tactical style strategic play, right?
For sure.
Where you're working in a particular team to watch your flanks and that kind of thing, which even though the game presents itself as casual, I could see people playing it in a more strategic, tactical way based on that, that option.
Yeah, I mean, I've done squads with random people online, and it's kind of gone both ways, where, you'll have everyone's like flying to different parts of the map, and it's like, okay, what are you guys doing? We're in a squad together, right?
Right.
And then I've had the other flip side where we're all kind of working together, and it's good. Yeah, I mean, I think the more I dive into this game, I'd like to maybe get some people together and kind of do more of a collaborative kind of play versus, me just doing solo all the time.
Right.
Which I'll still continue to do because I find a lot of enjoyment out of that.
Sure.
But yeah, that's Fortnite. I mean, you've probably heard of it. It's
with the amount of people that have played it, you've probably played it as well.
Yeah, and I mean, there's no real excuse not to play it because it's available on everything.
Yeah, and free, and I would definitely recommend giving it a shot, if only to see what all the fuss is about.
For sure.
And like I said, there's enough for different player archetypes that there's something that you might really enjoy out of it that you didn't expect.
So yeah, I guess the only main gripe is if you are playing on a PlayStation, you're kind of locked into that ecosystem because Sony isn't allowing cross-platform play.
Right.
Which there's been a ton of resistance online of people just wanting Sony to just kind of open up. But I think there's now, 80 million PS4s out in the market, I believe. 70 million. Like, there's a huge number, and I guess, Sony's making a percentage cut of every microtransaction. So, if you open up the platform for people to buy those microtransactions somewhere else, then that's potential money that Sony could be losing, right?
That's one way to look at it, sure.
But I think it'll hurt consumers in the long run because, if I'm playing on my Xbox and Darren's playing on his PC and my other buddy's playing on his PlayStation,
right,
he's left out because he can't play with the rest of us.
Sure.
And like I said at the beginning of this podcast, I think where gaming is going is that the system is kind of irrelevant. It's technology has got to a point now where we should be able to play these things wherever we want, however we want,
right,
and with whoever we want, regardless of what device they're playing on. Yeah, so that'll conclude this episode on Fortnite.
Indeed.
Yeah, if you like this show, then you can head over to our website to
secondplayerpressstart.com, and second is 2ND.
Yeah, you can head over there to subscribe to the podcast. If you're somehow hearing this not subscribed
Not
to
already subscribed yet.
Yeah, or you can go check out our YouTube channel, which we upload this podcast with a little video montage, so you'll get to see some of our terrible Fortnite skills.
Yes.
I've also uploaded a little montage of some of my finer moments, which I mentioned earlier. But
Nice.
yeah, that'll conclude for this episode of Second Player Press Start. So I guess we'll wrap it up by saying good night, Darren.
Good night, James.